And without any further ado, I do want to introduce our club friend and club member from Houston, Texas. And Houston and Philadelphia, if you're not a baseball fan, are now in mourning. They made it right to the end of their series. And we're hoping again for an Astro on Philly, maybe a replay for last year's World Series, but not quite. But Rick's done several very interesting presentations for our club, and we're already on the schedule for next year. But this one, Smokey and the Bear, I'm thinking that's going to be interesting. But if you've been collecting for 55 years, I know there's some really good stuff. I think what we really think of, I do amongst all his other stuff, just love this book, Buffalo Cinderellas. Coming from Buffalo, he couldn't resist. It's a great story. And again, if you like Cinderellas, like some of us do, you want to, take a look at that book. But he's very active in his the Houston Philatelic Society. And you said you'll be doing programming next year?
Yes, yes.
I'll have to talk to you, maybe buy you a couple drinks. It's but that's going to be really good. But he was in State College about a week and a half ago doing research for his presentations for next year. So you can tell that he takes his work very seriously, and we're very glad to have Rick with us. Next year, you're going to be doing Captain Tim, and then the Paris Bourse.
That's
two
right.
Very, very interesting topics. So I think it's going to really fill a nice need in our club. So, well, without any further ado, we will all mute. Now, do you want questions before, during, after, or doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. During, if you're moved to, and definitely after, of course.
Okay.
I wonder if I start by sharing screen and go into the first image, and then I can. Does that make the most sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it a PDF or are you doing it from PowerPoint?
Here we go. Do you see this?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. Well, then I can start talking.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much, Paul, for the kind words, and thank you everybody for having me here tonight. It's great to see so many faces and many familiar faces, and I'm also grateful for friends that have joined. I see Daniel and Tom, and appreciate that very much. Okay. First of all, I want to start by saying that this isn't a highly serious philatelic talk, yet I believe it's an interesting focus. And like Paul mentioned, 55 years ago, my dad and my uncle Clark, who were both stamp collectors, told me to have fun and collect what I like. And this direction kind of spread further from the stamp world. I collect a variety of things. And, for all of us, whether you gravitate to philatelic rarities or common interests, I like to think that the passions that you have for collecting are the same as mine here. And it's really those passions which bring us together as club members, fellow stamp collectors, and, people that are interested in fun stories. So I hope that you enjoy that. I'd also like to point out that there's a really interesting YouTube talk on their APS channel by a fellow named Rick Gibson on his Smokey Bear collection. He did a really fine job with that, and I'd love to tip my hat to him. So if you'd like more information on Smokey, then check that out. And I hope you have fun and enjoy what I'm going to share tonight. So I'd like to begin by telling the tale of Smokey Bear and his historic impact on our culture. And I'd also like to reveal his story by sharing Smokey Bear postal histories, postmarks, and nearly 50 years of U.S. Forest Service Cinderella or souvenir stamps. We'll start off by looking at a poster designed by Walt Disney Productions for the Forestry Service. This encouraged the public to be aware and prevent forest fires. Now, the Bambi movie had come out in 1942, and when it opened, it didn't do very well. So the company's partnership with the government and the imagery was really to everyone's benefit. And Washington had other reasons to promote this message, because in late 1944, Japan launched over 9,000 Fugo balloons or balloon bombs into the Pacific jet stream. And they were actually developed in the 1930s. They were intended to hit the United States all along the West Coast. And their intention was to ignite large-scale forest fires and spread panic in America. Yet they began launching in November of 1944, and that was when the damp seasonal conditions were prevailing. And in about 7 months, only one incident actually occurred where 6 people were killed in Oregon. And that's out of more than 900 balloon bombs, which hit the mainland. The use of Disney's Bambi-like image was only for a year. So instead of spending money renewing the license, the Forest Service approved a sketch of a bear that had been created by one of their artists. And the name Smokey was chosen to honor a New York City Fire Department hero, Smokey Joe Martin, shown here, who had suffered burns and blindness in a 1922 rescue. Now, August 9th, 1944 is considered the birth date of the character Smokey Bear. And this is the first poster with Smokey pictured on it, which came out on October 10th of 1944. One thing that's interesting to note is the first slogan associated with Smokey was here, shown here, care will prevent 9 out of 10 forest fires. And a few years later, circumstances caused the character to grow from a drawing or a cartoon to an actual living symbol. Well, a huge raging fire in New Mexico's Lincoln National Forest in 1950 took an amazing toll on Mother Nature, ultimately destroying 17,000 acres. And as the smoke was literally clearing from acres and acres of burned forest, brave firefighters came across a 3-month-old bear cub clinging to a charred tree, and they helped him down and took him to safety. Well, this is Dr. Ed Smith in Santa Fe, New Mexico, tending to the little bear's wounds and bandaging his burned, blistered paws. The cuddly youngster was initially called Hotfoot Teddy, and he was very weak, extremely sick. He was turned over to a fellow named Ray Bell, a New Mexico Department of Fish and Game ranger, and the bear refused to eat for several days. And thankfully, Ray's wife, Ruth, nursed the cub back to health. And she did so by manually feeding it a concoction of milk, honey, some baby food, some kind of oatmeal stuff, and it eventually saved the little bear's life. The national news heard about the bear's charming story, and the U.S. Forestry Service was contacted by the New Mexico State Game Warden. It was decided that the cub would be turned over to the U.S. Forestry Service as long as the bear became the focal point of a national program of fire prevention and conservation. And he became known as Smokey, the same as the government agency's cartoon bear representative. And here's a picture taken after his recovery, which shows Ray and Ruth Bell's 4-year-old daughter, Judy, with Smokey. And the furry celebrity's adventure continued. A man named Homer Pinkins, the deputy director of the New Mexico Department of Fish and Game, cared for the bear a bit for a few weeks. Then together, they flew to Washington, D.C. in a specially dedicated Piper airplane provided by Piper owner Bill Piper himself. That's a pretty cool thing. And here is Smokey helping with the pre-flight checklist. And this here is a picture of Smokey and Homer Pickens in what was likely considered first class. The cub actually traveled safely in a cage just behind the front seats there. But Smokey experienced a wonderful welcome in Washington, D.C., greeted by the press, dignitaries, fans, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, members of Congress. Pictures like this from this event appeared in print all across the country. Smokey had literally become a star. And he was loved by people everywhere, young and old. And it's interesting to note that as a symbolic figure in America, even considering sports heroes of the time, Smokey was second in popularity only to Santa Claus. Well, the National Zoo in our nation's capital was where the iconic bear would live out his life. And when they saw Smokey, children screamed with delight, and photographers popped scores of flashbulbs, and numerous gifts and thousands of fan letters poured into the zoo every week. And here's a picture of the now 12-year-old Judy Bell in 1958 visiting Smokey Bear at the zoo. In 1962, Smokey was joined at the zoo by a mate who was named Goldie Bear. another New Mexico orphan, and it was hoped that some Smokey Bear descendants would take over the mantle and ambassadorship of Smokey, yet that didn't happen. But 9 years later, in 1971, when the pair still hadn't produced any young, the zoo added little Smokey to their cage, another orphaned bear cub from the Lincoln National Forest, and they announced that the pair had adopted them. On May 2nd, 1975, Smokey Bear officially retired from his role as a living icon, and the title Smokey Bear 2 was bestowed upon Little Smokey in an official ceremony. The original Smokey Bear died on November 9, 1976. So many newspapers published articles and obituaries like this. The National Zoo Archives filled 4 complete scrapbooks devoted to the coverage. Pretty amazing there. As stipulated by a congressional resolution, he was flown back to New Mexico and buried in Capitan, New Mexico, close to where he was rescued. And since 1979, the location has been known as Smokey Bear Historical Park. Now let's go back again several decades and we'll focus on some philately. This is an image of what may be the very first forestry label or Cinderella stamp ever produced. And by the way, now is a good time to mention that the term Cinderella was not coined until 1959. Souvenir stamps not valid for postage were previously called labels or stickers or poster stamps. And as far as this one goes, I've only seen one image of this octagonal label. It was issued in 1930. It measures a little over 3 inches by 3 inches. There were 3 similar variations of this image issued in 1939 and 1940. They were bright yellow and they measure about 1.5 inches by 3 inches. And okay, so let's now connect the story of Smokey Bear to the U.S. Forestry Association, which was responsible for sharing a message of fire safety and conservation to the American public. In 1985, a fellow named David Jackson, who did business as the Jackson Stamp Company, obtained a license to produce Smokey Bear stamp albums with special pages for Forestry Association labels or Cinderellas. Here's mine, which houses some of my favorite Smokey Cinderellas. And David Jackson did a really nice job documenting Forestry Association stamps from both the United States and a few from Canada. His work is quite informative, so I'm going to use his album here as a roadmap through the world of forestry labels. He also created a numbering system for each of these stamps too, which is really very helpful to collectors. So this would also be a good time to note that there's a few other Smokey stamps which were released either at the state level or independently, yet background information or production numbers for those, they're sometimes sketchy at best, so it's likely why they're not included in Jackson's Smokey album. Here's a mail out from David Jackson in 1991 when he did a marketing push to sell more albums and expand the pool of people who were interested in collecting Smokey Bear forestry labels. And this April 1st, 1991 price list offered a 50% discount on all Smokey stamps for a 3-month period. And if one spent more than $30, he would give away a Smokey Bear stamp album for free, just for the asking. These were some really great prices. I remember ordering from this list. The American Forestry Association issued 4 poster labels from 1939 to 1943. Here's 3 of them, which are in my collection. The 4 stamps were issued in sheets of 100. It's not known how many were produced. The Canadian Forestry Association followed suit in 1943 with 5 different designs, and these too came in sheets of 100, and the number of quantities printed is unknown. Back in the States, a U.S. Forestry Association's artist in 1944 came up with that sketch of a bear to be the organization's marketing symbol named Smokey, and promotional posters with that slogan, "Care will prevent 9 out of 10 forest fires," were produced. And it would be a little while before Smokey appeared on a stamp. Here's the very first U.S. forestry label, which David Jackson numbered SBR1 for Smokey Bear 1. Though there were 5 million of these printed in 1944, they're actually pretty tough to find today. I just got mine recently, and it was a really cool surprise to see that it came from David Jackson. I mean, that's the, whoops, that is, there we go. Let's go there, and let's click this one. There is the mailer that I received from David B. Jackson. I had no idea that he was still around, and he affixed 2 Smoky Forestry stamps to the package as well. Anyway, SBR2 is shown here, and it has federal and state forest services along the bottom there, as does SBR1. There's also 5 million of these that were produced too. That was also in 1944. And the quantities of those 2 stamps were sufficient to last until 1946, when 1 million each of SBR 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 were released. And as you can see, SBR 7 on the far right is the first forestry stamp to have the slogan, "Only you can prevent forest fires" on it. And also note that these have U.S. and state forest services printed on them as well. And this is what annual forestry labels would have along the bottom for the next 20 years through 1965. And then all forestry stamps issued in 1966 and after that had nothing but images and slogans on them. These are the very first forestry stamps, which have the likeness of Smokey Bear that we're most familiar with. They were issued in 1947. They were on separate sheets of 80 stamps each, and a combined total of 4 million stamps were printed. And here's a photo of the actual very young Smokey, recovered from his wounds in 1950, next to a poster of this image. This is a collage of forestry stamps issued annually from 1949 to 1954. You got a couple different sizes here. The larger ones are rouletted 9.5 by 9.5, while the smaller ones are perforated 12.5 by 12.5. And check out the production numbers. The Forestry Service sure was getting their message out, and a lot of these stamps were distributed by mail to kids who wrote Smokey Bear letters. These total nearly 50 million stamps over 6 years, which is an astounding number. And check out the production numbers for the 1955 Smokey Bear stamp alone. This is from David Jackson's album page. Over 15 million stamps were produced of SBR 16 in that year alone. Now, the Jackson stamp album has pages for each year's stamp with spaces for a block of 4 and a single. When production numbers are known, they are listed there, as are perforation sizes. And it's an interesting format. Well, as you may know, many conventional stamp albums offer spaces just for single stamps, or blocks only if several stamps were issued together each year. And in no particular order, here are stamps issued 2 each year from 1956 through 1961. And here's those same stamps issued in pairs for those various years. And all were issued in sheets of 80 stamps per sheet. Smokey wasn't shown on the 1962 stamps, yet he was back on at least one stamp issued for the next 10 years. Here are stamps issued in 1963, 1964, and 1965. Beginning in 1966, the annual stamps were issued in blocks of 4 different designs. There were actually 2 different blocks of, or 8 stamps total issued for some reason in 1982. Not sure why, but the 1966 stamps in the upper left were issued in sheets of 80, while the next 24 annual releases came out just in simple blocks of 4. And you can see that they are cut along the edges there. This is 8 years of forestry stamps. I like that the one in the lower right from 1976 has a bicentennial theme with George Washington and Ben Franklin, Abraham Lincoln. They're on their stamps, as well as Smokey. And here's another 8 blocks of 4 with some of the releases from 1977 to 1988. As you can see, his name is on each year, while his likeness is only on one of the blocks, the one from 1977. And this image shows the blocks issued in 1986 and 1989. Not sure why the same design was reused. The one on the left from 1986 has 12 and a half by 12 and a half perforations, while the 1989 block on the right has 10 and a half by 10 and a half perfs. And 1989 on the right there would be the very last year that Smokey Forestry stamps were issued. Just under 700,000 were printed that year. There's a few other stamp related items that I can share with you here. First is an almost full sheet of SBR 33 and SBR 34 stamps. They were printed in 1964. One row of 8 is missing at the top. Full sheets of some Smokey Bear stamp. There's you can kind of see the perfs at the top. So full sheets of some Smokey stamps show up now and then, yet partials actually turn up a little more frequently, as you can imagine. Here's some more items from my collection. These are all half sheets, give you a little idea. 40 stamps each on these, and they're from 1959, 1962, 1963, and 1965. And, you know, sometimes I think about it, there might really be an ambitious Smokey or Cinderella collector who could be trying to put together a full collection of sheets, yet what a challenge that would be. And here's a 1955 U.S. Forest Service label it's not in my album, maybe because there's no Smokey Bear connection to it, but it's still a pretty neat item celebrating 50 years of the Department of Agriculture's Forest Service. And let's see, now we're going to click to Smokey's likeness. Here we go. It actually showed up in the mail stream on a variety of ways. The 1950s saw Smokey's "Remember, only you can prevent forest fires" slogan used on postmarks for a number of years. Here is mail from 1952, 1955, and 1957 with the same cancellation. And then Smokey's image showed up on postmarks with the same slogan. This is in 1960, and that would continue to be prevalent for many years. Let's get a little closer here. Here are postmarks from 1961, 63, 64, and 65. And then that's from top to bottom. And from top to bottom here are ones from 1967, 1972, and 1974. So they used that cancellation with Smokey's image there for quite some time. That's from 1960 to 1974 that we know. I'd love to fill in the blanks and have one from every year, but we got a good start going there. And going back to 1958, Smokey's image appeared on first day covers of the Forest Conservation stamp, Scott number 1122. And this image shows two different versions of Smokey on those cancellation. Little different version of the face and the hat there, but definitely nice first day cancellations. These are pretty common collectibles. Like most commemoratives, there's a variety of covers and cachets available, just dozens and dozens of different ones. And, you know, you can find them anywhere from $1 to $5 and in between. I really like that green card there, honoring Teddy Roosevelt's contribution to conservation in America. Again, that was an inexpensive item, but a fun thing to find. Smokey's likeness is a little different on this 1970 cover with a meter, and I think it's pretty neat that they used green ink too rather than red ink, and that there's a state government agency that was sharing Smokey's message too rather than a commercial entity. Next is a $2.40 red ink meter strip with still another image of Smokey on it. This is from October 1st, 1990, sent from Rhododendron, Oregon. Over time, the massive fire prevention messaging campaign proved to be extremely successful. Smokey received tens of thousands of letters. In the month of October 1961, alone shown here, over 105,000 letters reached him. And as this letter from a young John Ball notes, it was not uncommon for people to send Smokey Bear jars of honey as a gift. Pretty neat. So, how are you, old pal? If you're wondering what the honey is for, it's for Xmas or Christmas. How are all your friends? So, a fun example of a letter. Well, I too was one of those kids who sent letters to Smokey when I was little, and I received an envelope like this one back in return, though I'm not sure if mine was a first day cover or not, but I certainly remember that image on the left. But I was delighted to become one of 3 million junior forest rangers, and I received a letter from Smokey there on the right, along with a bookmark, a membership card, some stamps, a postcard, a card pledging that I'd be careful with our natural resources. And these junior forest ranger kits were given out for free for decades. And they changed a little bit now and then. I'm going to scroll in quickly here to show the membership card here. This is the one I received. I got the green membership card here, stating that I would prevent forest fires. And the back of the letter here, shown in this example, in each of these kits had sheet music for a Smokey the Bear song written in 1952. There's a black and white clip, by the way, on YouTube of Eddie Arnold singing this song for some youngsters. They're really into it. It's about 4.5 minutes. And also note that our furry friend's name is simply Smokey Bear, yet when Steve Nelson and Jack Rollins wrote this song, in order to keep the rhythm of the tune, they add the word the between Smokey and Bear. And to this day, some call him Smokey, some call him Smokey the Bear. Well, his official name is simply Smokey Bear. So, also in 1952, the year this song was written, Congress passed Public Law 359 to take Smokey out of the public domain and place him under the control of the Secretary of Agriculture. A licensing program was then started to control the use and distribution of the name and image of our national treasure. And remember back when many department stores had stamp counters? Well, Gimbel's was one who somehow distributed these junior forest ranger kits, as did a department store in California named the Emporium. They were in the Bay Area. I found a cover one time at a show from the Emporium here, and interested if there's any others. This is another incarnation of the Junior Forest Ranger kit, which I sent for in the 1990s. I was curious to know whether they still did it. And I wrote a letter using a crayon, and it got there, and this is what came back. And a few of the items were different, yet the contents were similar to those earlier kits. And as funds for the forestry department and the national parks began to become tighter, the kits became pretty sparse. This is the final style which was distributed. It actually came with a plastic Junior Forest Ranger badge, which I have in one of my collector's notebooks, and didn't get to put it in with this scan. But in April of 1964, Smokey Bear earned his own zip code, 20252, because of all the mail that he was receiving at that zoo in Washington, D.C. And the only other person who was ever assigned a zip code for themselves was the President of the United States. And at one point, Smokey had a handful of secretaries to answer his mail, nearly 1,000 letters a day. At a peak, he received 13,000 letters each week. You could just write Smokey Bear 20252 back then, and the letter would get there. The zip code was decommissioned in 1994, yet it was reactivated for a bit, actually, in 2014 for Smokey's 70th birthday celebration. Today, fans who are more into 21st century modes of communication, Smokey has his own Facebook page, Twitter account, Instagram account, and YouTube channel. I don't know where he finds the time, but he keeps up with those. And anyway, you can see just a little bit there of a couple Smokey stamps on this image, and we'll turn our focus to them in just a moment here. Well, Rudolph or Rudy Wendelin began his career as an artist with the U.S. Forestry Service in 1933. 11 years later, he became the full-time artist for the Smokey Bear campaign, and Wendelin was considered Smokey's caretaker until Rudy's retirement in 1973. Here's the artist at work in 1954 and again in 1960, and under Wendelin's direction, Smokey's appearance became more friendly and human and appealing. And this is the 20-cent Smokey stamp that Rudy Wendelin designed. It was released in 1984, Scott number 2096, and that celebrated 20 years of Smokey Bear. First day ceremonies fittingly took place in Capitan, New Mexico. Here's a program from the August 13, 1984 events. And as you can imagine, with most commemoratives, here are there's numerous designs from that day, and most of them are totally inexpensive. Again, 25 cents to $4 or $5 at most. And here's some color cachets. There's some better first day covers as well. This is a really nice Fred Collins Smokey Bear cover. There's a Dorothy Knapp, and there's others. There's some fun ones that are a bit more collectible. This is a USPS first day souvenir page, and you can see here, if I scroll in a bit, that Mr. Wendelin is noted there as the stamp's designer right here, Rudolph Wendelin, Arlington, Virginia. Now, Rudy was not at all pleased with the printing of this stamp. New methods of production were used for the first time for this Smokey Bear stamp, and they certainly weren't perfected yet. There were numerous problems, inconsistencies, and errors. In fact, 70% of the run was thrown out or destroyed. This example illustrates some of the problems with registration and color shifts. This white here on the branch and this tan color to the right side of Smokey's face. These are color shifts. And, there's frequently errors which find their way onto the market after a stamp is released. Yet there's a lot of them with this issue. Here are pairs which are imperforate, meaning no perforations in between two stamps, either horizontally or vertically. And there are 6 blots like this one, which have been reported with imperfs both ways. These 6 are quite scarce and valuable. They're around $1,500 in Scott's catalog, I believe. They were at one time as high as $4,500. Plus, you can see from this pair here, the folks in charge of perforations were kind of asleep at the wheel at times. Here's an interesting misperf strip of 3, and here's a block of 6 with a couple plate numbers that has a couple slanted lines of perforations. 2 of these 3 are in my collection, and they're interesting, not super expensive, $30 to $50 range, whereas other commemoratives, they might sell maybe in the $75 to $300 range. So anyway, though disappointed in the production of the stamps, Rudy was happy to sign items that were sent to him and mailed to him. For many years, he responded to mail to his address in Arlington, Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area. And as you can see, that beneath his signature, he usually indicated that he was the stamp's designer. So here's another cover, and he signed, and he must have had a little rubber stamp or something that says stamp's designer. So many fans who mailed a heartfelt letter were lucky to receive a Smokey Bear sketch. This one is from 1993. This one's from 1994. It's actually a very nice signed piece of art. If you go back, you can see the difference in Rudy could have probably knocked this out in a couple minutes at most. This one would have taken a little longer. So artwork can sell for over $1,000, signed by Rudy Wendelin. And some collector was happy to get a response from Rudy, obliging him in a variety of ways. Here's a 20 question form that the collector mailed in, and Rudy filled it in 1995. He noted his favorite color, favorite food, movie, actor, sports team. I like question 18. What year did you create Smokey? And he said, I did not create the idea of Smokey. I only humanized the version in later years. So, pretty interesting 20 question sheet there. So now over the years, quite a number of Smokey Bear postcards with Rudy Wendell and artwork have been released. Believe that one on the left's from 1957. This is an interesting pair issued by the Forest Service in 1963 in my collection. And when I scanned this, I wasn't sure why it was released in this way or why it was connected like this, but pretty neat piece. These are two images that show a fine variety of others. And even when Rudy retired in 1973, the Forest Service did its best to stay relevant with kids. And here's an example from the 1990s with a hip hop slogan that would resonate with youngsters of that decade. This artwork isn't by Rudy, but again, Smokey did his best to stay relevant with all age groups and get that message out. So now, besides postcards, there's all sorts of other Smokey Bear related postal history to be found, and most of it's really inexpensive. It's fun to look for at a bourse or a stamp show. The Collectors Club of Seattle is noted on this cachet when the World Forestry Congress stamp came out in 1960. White Plains, New York hosts a really nice stamp show called Westnex, and this is their commemorative cover from 1984. I actually went to this stamp show with my brother many times in White Plains, New York. Now it's a coin and stamp club, but it's still going on. Excuse me. This 1993 National Scout Jamboree cover has Smokey Bear artwork on it as well as Smokey, Boy Scout, and Daniel Boone stamps on it. And when Smokey Bear turned 50 years old, there were some terrific commemorative postmarks honoring the milestone. This is from Capitan, New Mexico. And here are some other fine cancels from around the country. We'll scroll in a little bit here. And these are from New Jersey, West Virginia, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania. When I got these out, these all came from the same fella in Houston here on the bottom. So he was collecting various Smokey postmarks. This is a cover from a stamp show in Wooster, Ohio that has a nice Smokey cachet on it and a 50th anniversary of Smokey commemorative postmark. The first sheet in the Celebrate the Century series honored the creation of the teddy bear in the early 1900s with that stamp in the upper right. This cover has that particular issue with a Smokey Bear cachet. And by the way, just a couple years or 3 years after this cover was canceled, Smokey's message was officially updated to Only You Can Prevent Wildfires. That was in 2001, from Only You Can Prevent Forest Fires, changed to wildfires. And when I attended the Westpec show in April of this year, 2023, I made my own commemorative cover with the Westpec's trolley car postmark. So it's always fun to be a collector and make some new covers. And the last piece of postal history that I have to share is this cover, which has 4 1958 Smokey forestry stamps on it. It's kind of a novelty piece. And the sender was noted in the August 22nd, 1958 issue of Weekly Philatelic Gossip as being happy to send out 4 Smokey Bear stamps like this free to anyone sending a standard 3-cent stamp for delivery. What a nice public gesture. I mean, I just happened to be going through that Weekly Philatelic Gossip of August 22nd, 1958, and I saw D.A. Anderson offering 4 Smokey stamps. And that sender, Mr. Anderson, surely had a connection with Smokey Bear. He wrote this guide to classification of Smokey Bear stamps and forestry stamps. This is in the American Philatelic Research Library, and pretty cool. I came across this, and he certainly was interested in Smokey as well as the stamps and some that I've shown here. And so now as we get near the finish line, I'd like to quickly show how some examples of how Smokey has made his way deeply into our culture over many decades. This picture must have been taken in the 1950s. Imagine having a gas station or retail store of some sort and putting forth the time and the money involved to put a 4-story tall Smokey Bear on the side of the building. It certainly wouldn't have been done had Smokey not been popular and a great drawing card at that time. So a commemorative toy truck, mail truck, was issued in the mid 1980s. This has a Smokey fire prevention poster on it. And our favorite bear made it onto hockey trading cards in the 1990s. There is a smattering of them at the bottom, and hockey great Wayne Gretzky on them. The Los Angeles Kings had Smokey on their team sets in the 1990 and 91 season that they gave out to people going through the turnstiles at a select few games that year. So here's a sticker for a rock band called Smokey Contraband. This was affixed to a lamppost, and I saw this when I was in the Big Apple for New York 2016, the big international stamp show at the Javits Center. And I walked by and I said, "Can you believe it? Smokey Bear is here." And next, I happened to see this wildfire danger level sign when I was driving through Pennsylvania there one time to the American Philatelic Society. These are quite common near state parks or national parks. And here's a billboard that I saw on another trip. This is also mentioned smokeybear.com there. And there's actually a 97 feet tall Smokey hot air balloon, which makes its way to gatherings around the country. You can even go online if you'd like to book it for your event. So my birthday's in February, if you ever want to go to that website and book it for me. And this fellow came across the largest carving of Smokey Bear while traveling through South Dakota. I mean, I'm going to get a little closer here and look at the size of this and the bark on the size of that wood there. So Smokey was definitely in our national consciousness. Plus, if you happen to watch the annual Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, then maybe you've seen the Smokey balloon at that festive occasion. His first appearance at the Macy's Parade was back in 1966. And if you're wondering, there is a Smokey Bear Museum in Capitan, New Mexico. And the entrance to Lincoln National Forest in New Mexico notes that it's the birthplace of Smokey Bear. So, in closing, how did I get so drawn to Smokey Bear? Well, I got a stuffed bear when I was very, very young. And I believe I was 4 years old when I took this picture with my mom's camera on our front porch. And when my mom got the picture developed from the drugstore, I cut it out with those rounded tipped scissors, and I pasted it on some construction paper. She always had around. She was a school teacher, and I captioned it with a crayon. And I've been a Smokey fan ever since. And I've actually had other stuffed Smokey Bears after this original one, not a gigantic one like this one. They come in a variety of sizes over the years, but I got one many, many years ago, and he eventually needed some surgery. And so what happened to this little guy? Well, because that one meant so much with me, I found another bear that was willing to be a donor. And my dear wife, Christine, took them both to Dr. Mary Ann at the Doll Hospital north of Houston here. She's a retired chemist in the oil business, which is prominent in Houston. And she used 19 different chemicals on Smokey on the right there to bring that original bear to back to beautiful health. And she transplanted the bottom portion of the little guy on the left along with his hat. And so this is what my current Smokey has. And that top portion is 19 chemicals later. It's truly an amazing job that Dr. Mary Ann did. So that's my connection with Smokey. And I want to mention that since the introduction of Smokey Bear and the Wildlife Prevention Campaign of 1944, there's been a 60% decrease in wildfires in America. Because of heightened awareness, the average number of acres burned by wildfire every year dropped from 22 million burned in 1944 to just 6.6 million burned annually. That was about a dozen years ago. And here's me in 1999, 24 years ago, while visiting Smokey when he came to the Houston Arboretum. I remember eating cereal, reading the paper one morning, hearing that he was going to be at the Arboretum, and I said, I have to go get my picture taken with him. Smokey is the part of the largest running public service advertising campaign in U.S. history, and today, Smokey Bear's "Only You Can Prevent Wildfires" catchphrase is recognized by 96% of U.S. adults. So thank you so much for your time this evening. And if you have any questions or comments, it would be wonderful to hear them. Thanks again, everybody, for being here and listening to my talk about Smokey Bear.
Well, thank you very much, Rick. Wonderful. Really wonderful. The stuff you found, I'm amazed. Some of those things, but when you have the interest, things just kind of come your way sometimes.
You're right.
But yeah, that was great. Questions, comments, people?
I got one for Rick. You showed a gas station with a big bear on the sign.
Yes.
It hit me and I looked it up quick. I think that was at a bear alignment center.
Oh.
Because bear alignment started in Bangor, Pennsylvania.
Automobile alignment.
Right.
Yes.
And I think now it's not Smokey the Bear. They didn't use him as the example, but they had a picture of a bear in yellow climbing a tree. Bear alignment. So that gives you something to look up and add to your presentation.
That's great, Tom. Thank you so much. I wondered if it was like along Route 66 or something with all those, large giant donuts or Paul Bunyan or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I really couldn't tell you exactly where that picture was from, but it hit me when I saw the sign up above on to the right of his head had a B in it. And that just said, oh, bear alignment. Or it could have been Butch's garage. I don't know. But it hit well.
Thank you.
Hi, Rick. This is Scott and I loved your
Scott.
presentation again. You're one of my favorite presenters. But I wanted to mention that, sure. I wanted to mention that there were several Smokey the Bear themed baseball card sets issued in the 80s.
Wow.
I think they were mostly California teams, but I saw a picture of, I think the Atlanta Braves had one. And in 1987, they released one with some of the all-star players like Jose Canseco and
Wow.
all those other guys. And some of the sets actually have a card of Smokey himself.
Wonderful.
And so if you look around, you might be able to get Smokey relatively cheap compared to maybe some of the players. But since they came from the 80s, they were overproduced, so that you could probably find them pretty easily.
Wow. Thank you, baseball fan Scott. That's wonderful info.
Great. Other questions?
You ever get tagged with the nickname Smokey Bear Barrett?
No, but one of my grandfathers called me Smokey when I was little. I would see him and he'd say, "Hey, Smokey."
Hey,
I've also heard people take exception to Smokey the Bear, and I've always been cautious to say Smokey Bear.
Yeah.
Is there
you answered my question, about that. I always thought of the Smokey the Bear, and then the changes. Yeah.
It's so common. Both are in, our cultural lexicon, and I don't think there's a wrong way to say it. It's whatever you like. Somebody may, correct you, but either one is good.
Good. Other comments, questions?
Well, if you wanted to add something, you could add Smokey and the Bandit.
That's right. A little different interpretation of Smokey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Rick. Just again, this is Lou.
Yes.
As already has been mentioned, the presentations are A1, right on. You always weave a story. I've already read the book 3 times. And again, just kudos on when you do this. I mean, you went full tilt on this and tying everything together. It's just a pleasure to have you come to the club meetings and present these things, because I tell you, I sat spellbound the whole way, because when I first saw it, I thought, you know, he must be digging deep for something. But it was excellent, Rick, and thank you again for your presentation and your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Lou. You always have kind words, and I thank you, everybody. You know, I hope that the pace of the talks, with the number of images that I can find, helps people stay interested. I enjoy sharing the stories, and you know, if you have enough pictures, it really adds to it. And I love going to the American Philatelic Society and the research library and spending time looking in, you know, for background information. Like we all go to stamp shows trying to find gems, and when I find information in an old journal, I get the same sensation as when I find a cover in a box at a show. And I think ahead, what can I share with you next time? So I'm already got a couple folders started for 2 talks next year, and I hope to see you again then.
Just keep them coming.
Thank
That's
you.
all we ask.